Welcome back to Without a Curse as we continue our 6-week process of previewing each of baseball's 6 divisions. This week we wrap it up with the National League West as we bring on Nick Piecoro, who covers the Diamondbacks for the Arizona Republic. Nick, how are you? Thanks for coming on the show.
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on.
We're talking with Nick Piecoro of the Arizona Republic here on Without a Curse. And Nick, starting with the National League West, want to ask you about the Dodgers. Frank McCourt is finally selling the team, has to select the ownership group by the end of April, it looks like. So it seems as if this dark chapter in Dodgers history finally coming to a close. My question for you, Nick, as someone who covers the division for the Arizona Republic, how has covering the NL West been over the past couple seasons with the Dodgers being in the state of affairs that they've been in?
Well, it's kind of changed the whole dynamic of the division, obviously. They're not quite to the level of the Yankees or the Red Sox, but, they should have the kind of financial resources to be that kind of club in this division year after year.
Right.
And, it really hasn't been the case. They've had to go cheap in a lot of different directions. They've had holes that they've had to plug with utility-type guys or guys that probably, not guys that shouldn't be in the big leagues, but guys that you're surprised are in the big leagues with a team in the market like Los Angeles. It'll be interesting to see how things change. Obviously they were aggressive there with signing Matt Kemp, a contract that's going to have to be paid for by probably the next owners. They did fill some holes with some veterans. I think that there is a little bit of hope there with that team this year, but certainly, they didn't do what a club like the Red Sox would do to fill certain holes.
And Nick, on that note, the Dodgers do have Matt Kemp. They do have Clayton Kershaw. So I look at it from the perspective of when these new owners seize ownership of the team in a market like Los Angeles, the Dodgers is still worth close to $1 billion. That's what the bids are really coming out to. It seems as if for the new owners, because of Kershaw and Kemp, because of everything with the Dodgers, because of the market they play in, seems like getting back into contention shouldn't be too difficult once some steady money is behind him, right?
Well, they've definitely got the star power. They've got some of the parts that are the hardest to acquire. The top level talent. It's a matter of filling in, I think, behind them. They've gone pretty cheap on the draft the last several years. I'm not sure how many guys they've paid over a slot. Jock Peterson, one of their mid-round picks, was one of the only ones I can think of. I think they've been one of the lowest in draft spending in recent years. So, they're going to have to kick that back up and kind of open up that pipeline again of getting players, up through the system, which is something that they were pretty good at. Keep in mind, Kemp and Russell Martin and Clayton Kershaw and, James Loney, they've had a good, surplus of players coming through their system for a long time. So I think that's really going to be the key, in the long term. And we'll see what happens with the new owners. A lot of people are expecting, obviously if you're going to be able to afford $1 billion price tag, you're going to have some money to spend. A lot of people are expecting them to go after somebody like Cole Hamels next offseason, which obviously would change things pretty drastically.
We're talking with Nick Piecoro, covers the Diamondbacks for the Arizona Republic here on Without a Curse. And Nick, you folks in Arizona know about developing a farm system. Also know a little bit about Josh Burns, who's back in a familiar post with the Padres, replacing Matt Latos with Edison Volquez this offseason while acquiring other young pieces such as Yolder Alonso in that trade, replacing Heath Bell with Houston Street. Carlos Quinton, I think, could have a bounce-back year. Cameron Maybin, this could be the year he finally puts it together. The point I'm getting at, Nick, is could the Padres surprisingly contend this year like they did for most of 2010? I think this roster actually has some of that potential. What do you think?
Yeah, for sure. I think the part that maybe lends the most hope in my eyes is the fact that their AA rotation last season, by the end, was probably 4 or 5 prospects deep with guys like Casey Kelly and Joe Wheeland and Robbie Erlin. They've traded one of those guys, Simon Castro, to get Carlos Quinton, but like you said, I think Quinton has the kind of power that can play in any ballpark, including Petco. I know he's getting off to a slow start here with the injury, and he's going to miss some time to open the year. But that is an interesting bat to put there in the lineup. Cameron Maybin sure took some steps forward last year, as you mentioned. Nick Hundley's a pretty decent catcher. Chase Headley's put up some really solid numbers for a guy playing half his games at Petco. So I mean, there is, and I should mention to you before I go on that Jesus Guzman, a guy I've always been a fan of his bat, kind of showed that he can hit in the big leagues last season, and it looks like he's going to get to play a little bit now that Quentin is down. But you know, we know they can pitch. We know at least most guys can put up pretty decent numbers there in that ballpark. There seems to be some sort of an effect where, you know, you pitch well at home, you get confident, and maybe you go out and throw better on the road than maybe people were expecting. So I don't know. We'll see. I'm certainly a believer that they're a little bit behind, you know, clubs like the Diamondbacks and the Giants in the division. But you know, some of those guys that are coming up in the minor leagues, whether it's Jorko or you know, or Wieland or Erlin, whether they come, you know, pretty quick, I think that they could be an interesting team.
I agree. After making the postseason in 2009, Nick, under Jim Tracy, the Rockies fell off to 83 wins in 2010, only 73 wins last year in 2011. Two-part question here. Number one, why the downward trend the past couple seasons? Could we see a change in manager if the Rockies could have to slow start this year? And also a follow-up to that is, how do you see the Rockies going this year?
Well, I think that they fell off because the core of players that they've been kind of counting on for a long time, you know, they just sort of never really hit the potential that they thought they were going to be able to reach.
True.
You know, guys like Ian Stewart and Seth Smith and Chris Iannetta, you know, and even going back a little bit further, guys like Brad Hopp and Garrett Atkins.
They're all gone, most of them.
Yeah, well, those guys are all gone, and that's what they decided to do. They decided to change directions. You know, and try something else. I mean, obviously, it all starts with Tulowitzki and Carlos Gonzalez. I mean, another thing, obviously, last year was Ubaldo Jimenez kind of fell off, and they decided to change directions with that as well. So, I mean, I'm curious to see what ends up happening. I think they've got an interesting roster. You know, I think they'll score runs with Tulowitzki, Carlos Gonzalez. They brought in Mike Kadire. You know, Dexter Fowler seemed to take some steps forward in the second half last year. And then they've got some guys that are, you know, look like just, you know, Scott Helton's a solid contributor. Marcos Guerrero's probably going to be just a solid contributor. You know, they've got some pieces there. It's probably a question of how that rotation comes together. I mean, I guess it's sort of similar to the way the Diamondbacks were last season. You know, people figured they would score some runs, but nobody necessarily saw Ian Kennedy and Daniel Hudson and Josh Polmenter, of all people, coming forward and being effective. You know, and if that happens with, you know, we know, you know, Chassin's a solid starter, but can Nicasio do it over a full season? Can Drew Pomerantz do it over a full season? You know, how's Jason Hamill going to do? I'm sorry, not Jason Hamill. Jeremy Guthrie. How's Jeremy Guthrie going to do coming over from the American League? You know, they've got some guys that are capable. We'll see if it comes together for them.
Good stuff, Nick Piecoro, Diamondbacks reporter, Arizona Republic. Nick, we'll get to the Diamondbacks in a moment, but first the San Francisco Giants, of course, took the World Series in 2010, missed the playoffs last year. Big reason, of course, was Buster Posey's injury. Is Posey's sustained health maybe the biggest factor in the Giants making or missing the playoffs?
I think so. I mean, I think that guy was kind of the you know, just the centerpiece of the offense. You know, was really just a monster hitter from the moment he came up in 2010, and was obviously a very big reason why they won the World Series. And that lineup was just so stagnant without him. They just couldn't make up for the absence. You know, and they also had drop-offs from some guys. I mean, I think Torres fell off pretty drastically, wound up getting traded. Aubrey Huff fell off pretty bad. You know, there was just a lot of that going around with that club. You know, this year they're going to be a little different. You know, obviously Posey's healthy, and you know, if he can get back to being the hitter he was, that would make a huge difference. They also added a couple of outfielders that are going to add some athleticism and some, you know, just some versatility, I guess, to the way a team scores runs. In Angel Pagan and Melky Cabrera, I mean, they're not boppers by any means, but they can run a little bit. They can maybe put the ball into those gaps, and you know, at home and throughout the division where there's some big ballparks, maybe, you know, use their speed to you know, take some extra bases here and there, steal some bases. I think that it does add a little bit of a just a new wrinkle to the way that they'll be able to score runs this year that wasn't really an option last year.
A big picture question, Nick, on the Giants. I'm curious to get your take on it. Brian Sabean seems to be one of the more controversial GMs around baseball. He's obviously had a lot of success with the Giants, but a lot of people point to, obviously he developed Kane and Lincecum, the terrific rotation, but you mentioned a lot of shoddy veteran free agent signings and, some questionable trades, some questionable draft picks. How do you view Brian Sabean as a general manager over the years?
Well, I think that once they started to realize the value in the draft, it really changed things. This was an organization that kind of famously liked to punt their draft picks and
right.
Sign veterans to have to give up those picks to the other team that was losing the player. But when they wound up with picks that were protected, like the one that got them Tim Lincecum and the one that got them Buster Posey, I think that they kind of maybe started buying into the value of the draft. And this is an organization that's done an excellent job of developing starting pitching over the years. Going like you said, going back to Kane, after that with Lincecum, Jonathan Sanchez, Madison Bumgarner, and then Wheeler got them Carlos Beltran last year. They've got another kid in Kyle Crick who they think is going to be the next big thing. So I think that that Sabian's ability to kind of tinker with that roster in 2010 was impressive. He kind of remade it and reshaped it mid-season and did an excellent job adding pieces. But I think my opinion of him changed definitely as they started using the draft better.
All right, Nick, you, of course, cover the Diamondbacks for Arizona Republic, so you can certainly answer these questions. The D-backs improved by 29 wins from 2010 to 2011 to capture the NL West. How much did they overachieve last season, especially in the pitching staff with, you referenced this earlier, Ian Kennedy had a great season. A guy like Daniel Hudson really emerged. Josh Colmentor had a nice year. Some of the guys in the bullpen overachieved as well, you could say. How much did the pitching staff especially overachieve, and can they replicate their performances from a season ago this year in 2012?
Yeah, I think that's the big question. I don't know that anybody saw – most people didn't even know who Josh Colmentor was.
No, I didn't. I plead that.
Yeah, people certainly didn't see Ian Kennedy finishing fourth in Cy Young voting. Joe Saunders had an ERA around 3.5, which surprised a lot of people. I think most people saw the bullpen as an area that could show a lot of improvement. But then looking at the lineup, not that Justin Upton, Miguel Montero, Chris Young were necessarily surprises, but they hadn't really all had solid seasons at the same time. Some surprises, in the lineup, Ryan Roberts was a big one. Paul Goldschmidt, most people probably weren't really on Paul Goldschmidt.
Neither. No, I wasn't.
So, it's a lot of guys that came out of nowhere in some ways, and we'll see if they're for real, if they can do it another year. That's really the big question.
I used to say last year, think of any random major leaguer you haven't heard of for like 3 years, and he's probably on the Diamondbacks roster. That was a joke I had last year. Like Xavier Nady was on the roster last year, and a lot of guys like that. But this offseason, Nick, the Diamondbacks add Jason Kubel. They add Trevor Cahill from the A's, who had a lot of success in the American League last year. How much did the Diamondbacks, you think, improve on their core last season by adding what seemed to be some pretty solid veteran pieces?
Yeah, I guess the way I've been looking at it is, even if some of those guys that we were talking about earlier wind up regressing, they've added some pieces here, and Kubel and Cahill, and they added Takashi Saito and Craig Breslow to the bullpen. They'll have a full season of a guy like Brad Ziegler in the bullpen, of another guy, Brian Shaw, who emerged from their minor league system and throws a really nasty cut fastball. And a full season of Paul Goldschmidt. I think that I think that even if some of those other guys fall off and don't do what maybe they did last year, there's still a chance that the Diamondbacks will be able to kind of withstand that. And Kubel, I think, could put up some big numbers at Chase Field. You look at his home road splits, and they're pretty drastic at Target Field. A lot of guys don't like to hit there. It's cold. There's shadows. It's just it's a spacious park. The ball doesn't carry as well. and he hit pretty well in the Metrodome before moving out of there. So I feel like getting him in a hitter's ballpark like Chase Field, he could put up some pretty good numbers. And Cahill's a ground ball guy. He's gonna have to cut down on the home runs allowed. That kind of seems like a dangerous trend for him coming to this ballpark. I think just the sheer number of ground balls that he gets is generally a good thing in this ballpark. So, and look, even if he isn't the guy that he was in 2010 when he got some Cy Young votes and is more like the guy that he was in 2011, which is just an innings eater, mid-rotation guy, it's not a bad thing to have in a rotation that's already got Kennedy and Daniel Hudson.
Nick Piecoro, of course, does a great job covering the Diamondbacks as he has for the past couple years for the Arizona Republic. Nick, thanks for coming on Without a Curse. Great insight in the NL West, exactly what we were looking for, and we'll talk to you down the line. That was great. Thanks again for coming on.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.